and this week we welcome back a guest presenter, the American cartoonist Robert Crumb.
Hello folks, this is our Crumb again. I'm back with a special Christmas edition of Sweet Shellac program. We're going to do 4 programs of music from my fabulous 78 RPM record collection once again. This first program is going to be New Orleans jazz, actually recorded in New Orleans in the 20s, because most of what we know of New Orleans jazz from that period, what's well remembered, are people like Louis Armstrong and King Oliver, the original Dixieland Jazz Band, who all recorded after they had left New Orleans. So all the records we're going to hear are from people who stayed in New Orleans, never left the town, and were recorded there by the record companies who made field trips there in the 20s. So Columbia, Victor, and Brunswick would stop in New Orleans and make a few records. They usually would find a hotel or an empty industrial loft and set up a temporary studio. And they had to haul around this heavy equipment in big trucks, like the recording equipment weighed tons in those days. And they had boxes that they kept in dry ice of these wax masters that they used to record this stuff on. And then they'd keep those packed in these boxes and take them back to New York or the headquarters and decide what to issue. We'll start out with Monk Hazel's Bainville Roof Orchestra doing High Society. That's recorded in December 1928. That was Monk Hazel and his Bainville Roof Orchestra doing High Society. It was originally Sidney Arrowden playing clarinet, and Sharky Bonanno plays trumpet. Other than that, it's pretty much unknown musicians. This was a white band. Couldn't have black and white musicians playing together. It was unacceptable. Sometimes they did it in recording studios, but for public appearances they couldn't do it. After the first series of programs, got some letters, and people were curious about the shellac. What's with the shellac and the records? What's the story on that? And recently I found a essay by Primo Levi, who seemed to have an inordinate interest in the subject of shellac.
Shellac is the fruit of the encounter of two inventive imaginations: the extremely slow imagination of evolution or nature, which created it, and the swift and flexible imagination of man, which has found it suitable for various uses. The true inventor of shellac is an insect of lowly habits. Males and females of the creature in question begin their career in the guise of reddish larvae, barely visible to the naked eye. In innumerable swarms, they lazily explore the small branches of certain exotic trees until they find a crack in the bark, which allows them to insert their proboscis until it penetrates the succulent wood. At this point, they're settled and insured. They will have no more problems for the rest of their lives, but neither will they have experiences, emotions, sensations. They are infinite in number, millions of individuals on a single tree, and in fact the term lacquer, with which the product they secrete is designated in all languages, derives from an ancient Sanskrit word, which means 100,000.
For record collectors, of course, the happy news about shellac is that it's a substance that maintains its stability for thousands of years, so that our 78 records will not deteriorate over time. They know this because they found objects in ancient Egyptian tombs that were thousands of years old that had been coated with shellac that was still completely intact. The next band we're going to hear from is Sam Morgan's jazz band doing a tune called Short Dress Gal. When you listen to these black New Orleans bands that never left New Orleans, you can hear that they like to parade while they were playing. You can imagine them walking while they're playing down a street, wearing their uniforms. It's part of the whole feeling of the origin of New Orleans jazz is very much about that parading on the streets. That was Short Dress Gal by Sam Morgan's jazz band, Sam Morgan playing the vocal. Otherwise, they're all obscure, forgotten musicians that stayed in New Orleans. And let's hear some more from Primo Levi about shellac.
100,000 tiny parasites pump lymph and swell in silence. But even creatures with the best guarantees must nevertheless develop an art to protect their rears. Their art is a chemical art worthy of great respect. They transform the vegetal juice into a resin whose properties are neither banal nor lowly. In fact, shellac. They exude it from their pores, covering not only their rears, but their entire body. They're so densely packed that the covering of one individual ends by fusing and welding with that of its neighbors, so that the infested branches are covered by a compact and shiny crust, which must have attracted man's attention since ancient times. Beneath this crust lies the army of suckers, protected and imprisoned. The males communicate with the outside only through a small hole, which allows them to breathe. The females also keep open a second small hole, the extension of their genital orifice through which fecundation will take place. The male braces himself for a fleeting initiative. Having reached maturity, he comes out of jail and fecundates several females without direct contact, but utilizing the hole predisposed for this purpose. And then he dies. The fecundated females, and practically all of them do not leave their cell and continue to secrete resin. Inside the cell they deposit their eggs, survive until they open, then they too die. And larvae come out of the eggs and commence a new cycle.
During World War II, they found that shellac could be used as a coating for cannon shells, so in America and in Germany, I know, they had huge scrap drive where they collected old 78 records and melted them down, which is the bane of the existence for a lot of record collectors. Next, we're going to hear the Halfway House Dance Orchestra, a tune called When I'm Blue. This is a white group. In those days, a halfway house was not a drug rehabilitation center. It was a roadhouse where they played music that would be outside of a city or halfway between two towns, so it was called a halfway house. That was When I'm Blue by the Halfway House Dance Orchestra, with Leon Rapallo playing the clarinet. He later went to Chicago and joined the New Orleans Rhythm Kings, and then eventually wound up in an insane asylum. He blew his brains out on the clarinet, I guess. And now a bit more about shellac.
Shellac is a noble resin. It's transparent, withstands impact and sunlight, has a pleasant odor, is glossy, and what's more, has another curious and unique virtue, certainly useful to its insect inventor. When exposed to humidity, its permeability to water diminishes instead of increasing, as does that of almost all other organic materials. In short, it behaves on the molecular scale like an umbrella that opens spontaneously at the beginning of a downpour.
So much for Primo Levi and his morbid interest in shellac. Now we'll move on to Oscar Celestin's Tuxedo Jazz Orchestra, playing It's Jam Up, and this is a black group. It's interesting how there's two trumpets playing against each other on that record. It's a very typical kind of New Orleans tradition of horns playing around each other, which died out by the end of the 20s. Then it was kind of revived later on with the New Orleans revival. By the end of the 20s, they're all just taking solos. They don't do that. They don't play around each other anymore. The Tuxedo Orchestra goes way back. There was a Tuxedo Orchestra in New Orleans in the 1890s. I think that it just carried on, and musicians would graduate from it, and the new musicians would join it over the years. But the last record made by this band was something like 1928, and after that, don't know what happened to that band. was It's Jam Up by Oscar Celestin's Tuxedo Jazz Orchestra, which, if you consult the discography, has a female piano player named Jeanette Salvant. Never heard of her before. I don't know what became of her. Next we'll hear Ain't Love Grand by John Hyman's Bayou Stompers, a white group. John Hyman later changed his name to Johnny Wiggs. I'm not sure. He must have been sensitive about the name Hyman for some reason. I'm not sure why. It's a very eccentric piece, this, with very kind of advanced chord patterns in it. You know what they were up to, I don't know. That was Ain't Love Grand by John Hyman's Bayou Stompers. And Monk Hazel, who was the leader of the first band we heard, was the drummer in that band, which is slightly earlier period, 27. The last one we're going to hear on this program is by Louis Dumaine's Jazzola 8, a black band, and it's called Toa Bakawa. The tune in this is so simple. It's just a repeated three-chord melody, very simple. It's basically Midnight Special. But they do the variations on it they do are so beautiful, it doesn't matter. That was Towa Bakawa by Louis Dumaine's Jazzola 8. Kind of another band with that sort of parade feeling to it. So that wraps it up for this program. Next week, be featuring more 78s, and this time it'll be from Weimar, Germany, recorded in Berlin in the late 20s and early 30s, and very strange and interesting sounds. So see you next week.
That was Robert Crumb. The producer was David Perry. Our Jazz File series, Sweet Shellac, is a Periscope production, and you can hear another program in the series at the same time, 6 p.m. next Saturday evening.